So the 19th century, so into the 20th century now, and this is not particularly, I mean, I put this image up just as sort of it's American, of course, it's hard, I don't know why it's, of course, that it's American, it just sort of is, really. Probably early 60s, I'd say, of a family, representing a family, and who are quite clearly sort of, it's nuclear, they're physically close, it's all those things we saw in that first image that we saw in the first lecture. But the 20th century has also been a very complex century in relation to the history of childhood, because to begin with, probably for the first 2 decades, maybe 3 decades, there was a lot of debate about the moral peril that children still lived in, and especially the sexual moral peril. The children were, especially girls, but both boys and girls, continued to be seen as being in perpetual danger from corruption, but that the antidote now wasn't religion but education, and also professional development training. So from about in the first half of the 20th century, it was very important to train mothers, not fathers, mothers, on how to bring up their child properly. So child development textbooks emerged, underpinned in part by some of Freud's views on child development, and on another chap called John Watson's views on child development, who didn't happen to agree with each other. But the significance here, I guess, is now that you had to be trained how to be a mother or a parent, and you were trained by experts. And if you weren't trained by experts, or if you ignored the expert advice, the child may well grow up to be all the things you didn't want it to be. So children's child development became a huge area, and we're sitting in a building where the education building, which is dedicated really to some of the legacy of this. Is it kicking? Oh, sorry guys online, we've got a young mother here. Baby's kicking. So I suppose now the focus, the childhood became something that was professionally scrutinised, and people trained as childhood experts. And so the attention focused on training the child properly, so the attention really shifted from the parents, who were supposed to take expert advice, read expert books, but more towards the educationalist and the child development experts. Childhood, in other words, I guess, became professionalised to a great degree, but it wasn't just exactly in the early part of the history that I've given you. This is an image of that anyone who saw it or lived. I don't know if you remember this case of James Bolger, do you? Yeah, that's the still from the security camera in the shopping centre in Liverpool, where he was taken. This is Jamie Bolger, the little one, of course, who's 2 years old, and the child holding his hand is a 10-year-old, and the child walking in front was 9, and those 2 boys, the one holding his hand and the one walking in front, over a period of 3 or 4 hours, they think, tortured and beat this child to death, and then went home. There's still debates about what should have been done about that, but it was at the end. I think I put this in here because the end of the century, in which began with the view the child was corruptible from outside forces, and it was very important to train this child with expert advice to become a well-behaved adult. This case sort of dropped towards the end of the century and completely shocked not just the society where it happened, but probably the world, I think, which is why this image is so riveting, because it's the last time anyone saw this child until it was found cut in half on a railway line about 12 hours later. But children have horribly got murdered in the past, but the shocking thing about this was a premeditated. They said, these boys, that they decided they'd do this, and so they went and did it, and then they walked through the streets of Liverpool with a child, 2-year-old, who got more and more tired and crying, and he fell over or they hit him and he had blood on his face, and people, it was a whole horrendous, if you want to read the story somewhere, that people, nobody really felt that they could go and intervene. There was several people afterwards said they were a bit worried about this, and I think one woman went up and said, "What's wrong with your little brother?" And one of them said, "It's all right, we're just taking him home." And that was it. And so that was literally the last time he was seen. And here we see, I suppose, the evidence that there was a lot of debate about the fact that these two boys were evil and that children could still be evil. And so huge public debate. And how? Yeah. What happened to them? Yeah. They were tried in an adult court. There were sort of photos of, because they're only tiny, they were, little working class Liverpool kids who probably lived on, not very good food, skinny little things, standing on boxes in the dock. They were sentenced to, I think, 14 years prison, and they've now got different identities. Nobody quite knows where they are. Well, nobody does know where they are. But it was more that it said that one of them was grooming girls online. It was Venables, I think, John Venables, nobody knows what his name is now. But they would be 93, they were 8, so what would they be now? In their 20s, late 20s? So yes, so the question of what is a child and how children are supposed to behave. The other thing that was discussed, not just that children could be evil, but that these kids had been dragged up in some awful homes and that had watched violent videos, and then they were videos, and that this people were searching for explanations as to this sort of behaviour. So that's just a little comment there to finish off about 21st century children in the 21st century. Really continue, I think, to straddle, and childhood straddles these two sort of extremes of being innocent and corruptible. But as well, as I said, children now have rights enshrined in law. They increasingly being allowed more choice. They're becoming more economically, as they get older, much more economically powerful. But there is still, I said, but the final slide is a photograph by a guy called Robert Mapplethorpe, who photographs children, and it was this image, an image which engendered a lot of criticism about the fact that this child was being sexualised by this image. There continue to be concerns about the vulnerability of children, especially to moral corruption. So not much really has changed in 400, 500 years that we've gone through. And I just want to finish with that figure that ADHD diagnosis and other sort of mental evidence of mental disturbance, these sorts of diseases are increasing apparently amongst children. Now you could argue whether or not they are actually increasing, or whether they're because children are being more and more scrutinised as individuals in their own right. Children are being diagnosed with these sorts of disorders where they wouldn't have been before.
Like half the time ADHD is just because the education system can't cope for such a scope of different learning abilities, and people just go, "Oh, well, you have ADHD."
Yes, I mean, I think you're right. I think there is another lot of work to be done on the question of how children come to be identified in relation to these so-called. I mean, they may be disorders, but the questions disorders themselves, as anyone who's doing Carrie Bennett's units on mental health, disorders themselves are socially constructed in that way. All right, I'll leave it there. The story goes on, I think, about what are children in childhood, and in the Tute today we can sort of develop these themes. And if you want to come to the Tute today rather than tomorrow, that's fine as well. Otherwise, as I said, you won't be penalised by the fact that I'm taking industrial action tomorrow, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much.